Anyway, Andrew in Bethlehem, how are you?
Hey, how are you?
Pretty good.
Yeah, I called before, but I have another point to make about when people say they want to prove God exists. They're not trying to prove God exists with certainty. What they're trying to say is that the possibility exists.
Okay.
They're trying to prove that the possibility exists.
Sure. So, assuming you're correct, because we could talk about degrees of certainty and everything else. Number one, I don't see any. Now, it depends on what you mean by possibility. If you mean that it's not absolutely impossible, I actually don't care whether or not you can prove that something's possible, which if you can just demonstrate that something is not logically excluded.
Do you mean physical evidence?
Well, yeah.
Well, or just anything that can be studied or observed.
I hadn't really finished what I was saying.
Sure.
Saying that you can prove that something is possible doesn't make any difference, because possible doesn't equal true. And I care about true things, and I want to believe true things. And so instead of possible, we should talk about perhaps probable, which would actually include some demonstration that there's a good reason to think this is true or likely true. That's why we have beliefs, and that's how we go about justifying them. So I don't care if your particular God is possible. I mean, that's just saying that you've managed to come up with a God that's not logically inconsistent, which, by the way, I'm not sure I agree with, depending on your God.
Yeah. And also, I'm sorry, I'll just make a quick point here and let you get on with it. Sometimes you will hear theists and Christians make the argument that, God is a concept, a being that is beyond scientific understanding, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And generally, those are more or less ways of dodging the issue. But one phrase that you'll hear repeated often is that absence of evidence does not equate to evidence of absence. And I would disagree with that. I think you would disagree with that.
It's false.
Yeah, because in situations where, if the claim were true, you would expect to have evidence. And I think that in situations where most claims, I can't think of a claim that would be a true claim where you would not expect to find evidence that would say, yes, in fact, that is true, right? Whether it's a god, whether it's ghosts, whether it's elves tending your garden, if you're going to make a claim about something and you want to be able to say, okay, that is the true answer, there's this puzzle that we're trying to solve, there's this fact that we're trying to come to grips with, and in order to distinguish this being the true thing from all these other possibilities that aren't the true thing, what do we look at? What do we look at as our evidence? And so, yes, you would expect to find, I think, certain conditions would exist in the universe if the universe were the creation of an all-knowing, all-powerful, sentient, purposeful deity, right? Because I've never had a Christian tell me what they think a non-God designed universe would look like. How would it function?
Well, we're talking about God, so we're not necessarily talking about Christianity.
But I'm just talking about like evidence and what we would, what we mean when we say that.
Sorry. So, go ahead, Andrew.
Well, I have a website. It's Proof of God, and it's godtruestory.webs.com. What I do there, I try to list like all the attributes of God, all-knowing, all good, all powerful.
Can you say that URL again?
And I try to show how they're consistent. Now, something that you said earlier was that faith is the absence of reason. I think what it really is faith is the absence of physical evidence. Now, when you say evidence, I think what you're really saying just about all the time is, do you have physical evidence?
What kind of other evidence is there?
Well, what I provide is rational evidence.
I'm fine with rational argument.
An argument that anyone could look at, and
Andrew,
no matter what they believe in, and they would accept the argument.
Andrew, I'm fine with rational arguments, but rational arguments are formed on premises, and the premises need to be demonstrated to be true. So if we're talking about something that is real, then the premises must demonstrate that this is actually real. So, I mean, my question to you about what other evidence was there was whether or not you were making an appeal to supernatural evidence or extrasensory evidence or things like that.
Well, here's how I feel about God. God would be a pure mind. So when I say rational evidence, I just look at my own mind and I just extrapolate.
Sure.
Okay, so what's your basis for thinking that that's what God is?
Well, it's just about the fundamental idea with every religion is God is a mind.
Okay, but
it's an absolute mind.
Okay.
So, by definition, God would be an absolute mind because that would be the power.
I don't even know what absolute mind is.
Okay. Well, earlier, Martin said that how would a non-godlike universe look like? I would say that universe would not possess consciousness.
How do you? Whoa! So you think if a universe existed without being created by a god, that universe could not have consciousness?
And here's the reason why.
Because, what do you mean exactly by that? Do you mean that the universe itself would not be a conscious entity, or that the universe would not contain like beings like us in it that have consciousness?
It would not possess conscious beings.
Sure. How did you get to that conclusion?
Why? Okay, why would that be the case?
Well, because let me correct that. Actually, it would not have rationally conscious beings.
Whoa!
What's that's hair splitting. I mean,
well, conscious is just say self-awareness, but
okay.
I'm talking about like
a dog is self-aware, right? I mean, you know.
What makes you think that there could be a non-created universe with conscious entities that were incapable of rational thought? I mean, that rational thought would be excluded in this.
It would be a universe that can't think about its own existence.
I understand what you're describing. I'm asking why.
Well, if we look at, say, a tree shrew. A tree shrew is an animal that we would suppose doesn't have any rational thought.
Maybe
but it has
not.
the same evolved brain that humans do, in the sense that it has the same body to brain mass ratio. It also has the same frontal lobe curvature, the same aspects. A lot of
okay, but why would this be a thing that would still require a deity creating it?
No, don't concede that.
Yeah.
No. You're saying that a tree shrew isn't rational. Prove it.
That's.
I mean, a tree shrew is at least self-aware.
You know, we've trained all kinds of animals.
For calling now, like I can't.
We've trained all kinds of animals to do things. They don't necessarily demonstrate the same level of thought that we do, but they demonstrate, hey, if I push this button, I get a treat, and if I push this other button, I get the shit shocked out of me. Yeah. Isn't that rational thought?
But according to the criteria I specified, this is the same criteria neuroscientists claim how humans evolved consciously. I mean,
let's just take it back to basic self-awareness, okay? If the forest is burning, a tree shrew will be sufficiently self-aware that it will try to run from the flames to preserve its own life. So that's at least that much self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So when you defined what you consider consciousness, rational thought, as simply self-awareness earlier in this conversation, the tree shrew qualifies. So
on that basic level, yes. Yeah. But I'm talking about like a rational self-awareness about its own existence. Sure, it would move in order to save its life, but it's not pondering about.
There are no philosophical tree shrews, is what you're saying. And so that level of cognition requires a creator, is what you're saying.
There's no evidence
or a universal mind.
Because if we look at consciousness, we all know the components of how consciousness emerged or evolved. We all know the chemical properties that caused it to.
Sure. So if we don't know, by your own admission, how did you determine that it's impossible for it to happen in a universe without a God, and that tree shrews don't have this?
Well, you would just suppose that it came from a higher mind. I mean,
no. You don't just get to suppose that something comes from a higher mind. That's not how. Maybe you don't have reasoned thought.
Yeah.
That is. I'm actually asking you to demonstrate something, and you're just saying no. You just get to suppose it. Well, I'm going to suppose.
I think it's more probable that it came from a higher mind than that it evolved.
I don't care what you think. I don't care what you think is more probable. I care what you can demonstrate is more probable. How do you demonstrate this?
That would be hard.
You betcha. And so, if you believe that it's true and probable right now, and you admit that you can't demonstrate this right now, aren't you believing something without a good reason?
Well, now we're going back to where we started, because
I just asked a question.
Okay.
You have admitted that you can't demonstrate this, correct?
I can't physically demonstrate it, yes.
And yet you believe it to be true, correct?
That's where faith enters.
Okay? And that's why I don't give a rat's ass, because faith is the excuse people give for believing something when they can't demonstrate it, when they don't have a good reason. We're back to my definition. I don't care what you have faith in. People can have faith in anything. Faith is not a justification. It's not a demonstration of truth. It's not a path of truth. It's gullibility.
Well, now what you're talking about is the difference between conviction and faith. Because if we look at, like, according to, it seems to me like you're convinced by things that they're physically demonstrable. But,
yeah.
Well, that's at least something you can look at.
Physicalism. You seem to believe that everything real must be physically observable.
You're confusing.
But can you physically prove
Andrew,
that is true?
Andrew,
that's the question.
Wow. Andrew,
you can't physically prove that is true.
Oh, shit. Andrew, you're on hold, not hung up on. You're confusing philosophical naturalism with methodological naturalism. Methodological naturalism is the purview of science that says, you know what, we can't rely on faith and supernatural explanations. We have to rely on evidence and data. Philosophical naturalism, on the other hand, is the assertion that only the physical world is real. I'm not making that case. I'm talking about what is believable, what is demonstrable. And you've already admitted that what you're talking about is not demonstrable, that you have to rely on faith for it.
That's where faith enters. It's a
yeah,
matter of
and
conviction
why?
versus faith.
Why?
But because science seems to have limitations, unless you accept physicalism as true.
No.
The fact that science has limitations.
You're saying that this is where faith comes in, and I asked why. And your answer is because science has limits. Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, why are you justified in just applying faith when you reach the limit of science? How is that not gullibility?
Well, that's not really true. I'm not just applying faith. I also have a rational argument that's consistent that I accept. That seems more probable than the idea that the mind evolves from out of whatever.
In other words,
the
argument from incredulity fallacy is your rational argument. It simply seems more probable that it would be this than that. It seems more fantastic that it would be the other thing than this thing that I prefer to be the answer. All you're doing is you're spackling over the gaps in the knowledge with faith, with assumptions, with assertions, with leaps that you don't really have a justification for making. You're hitting the wall where you admit this is where the limits of my knowledge are, but what you do when you hit that wall is you say, this is as far as we've gotten now. This is how you approach these questions honestly. You say, this is as far as we've gotten now. So what do? We keep studying. We try to learn more. We don't say, okay, this is as far as we've gotten now, but in order to get over here, which is where I want to get, I'll just create a bridge of imagination. I'll just make stuff up, and I'll create the bridge myself.
Science hasn't opened this door yet,
yeah,
but it sure seems more probable to me that there's a lion on the other side of the door than a tiger.
The best you can say from your position, Andrew, is, look, this is as far, maybe it could be this, maybe it could be the other thing, but you're not in a position to say, this is the answer, because it seems more probable than this or that. You still have to, as long as you admit you don't know.
You don't get
you still don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
And you shouldn't be.
Yeah,
I hope neuroscience does continue to look into
the phones are going to piss me off.
The origins of consciousness. But
Andrew,
the point is, Andrew, you don't want to make the basic mistake that creationists and, generally speaking, religious people who don't really grasp how the scientific method works do. You don't want to get in the position of simply putting your ignorance on an altar and calling it God.
Well, when
that's
I'm
what you don't want to do.
God is possible, I'm open for possibilities, including neuroscience coming up with the answer.
As long as you don't mistake a possibility or a probability from an established fact, from an actual answer where you can say this is the answer.
And as long as you stop saying something is probable when you admit that you have no criteria by which to determine a calculation of probability.
Well, you're talking about physical probabilities. So you have to have a physical test to determine how probable is this idea of mine.
Let me do this, Andrew. Let me do this, because if I don't, I'm just going to hang up on you. Here we go. There are two possibilities. Either a God manifests in reality or no God manifests in reality, correct?
True.
Okay. Those gods that don't manifest in reality are completely indistinguishable from those that don't exist, correct?
No. No, because
how do you distinguish?
You could say it's a group of fairies that created the universe.
No, you're not listening.
Oh my goodness.
Either a God manifests in reality, or it doesn't. If this God exists and doesn't manifest in reality in any way, it is indistinguishable. Its existence is indistinguishable from its non-existence because it's not manifesting in reality.
Okay, let me get.
Yes or no?
Let me get what you're trying to say. All right, you're trying to say whether or not it's Zeus. It could be Zeus. It could be
No.
Stop. Listen to what I'm actually saying. This is really simple. Here's three gods. Go back to Tracy's analogy, and I'll twist it. This God exists and manifests in reality. This God exists and does not manifest in reality, and this God does not exist. Please tell me how to distinguish between numbers 2 and 3.
Okay, the last God does not exist.
The last God doesn't exist. That's number 3.
Exist, but does
and
not
number 2,
manifest in reality.
Correct. How do you distinguish between those two?
Through rational thought.
How?
How?
Based on the probability, how did the consciousness...
Yeah.
Done.
When you can form a rational thought and a coherent one, please call back.
Wow.
Until then, yeah.
Okay, so
he
I'm
was spinning after one.
going to finish my thought because this is important.
I need an Oreo.
Go ahead.
Want an Oreo?
We need more levity. Okay. Really? Matt from Oslo called back already?
No, let's...
Too bad. Next week.
Yeah.
Next week I will talk to Matt from Oslo. Actually, I won't be here next week, so Russell can talk to Matt from Oslo. I will be at the Secular Student Alliance Leadership Conference.
You're welcome,
Okay,
Russell.
so there's two possibilities. Either God manifests in reality, or it doesn't. Now, if it doesn't manifest in reality, my contention is that this God is indistinguishable from a God that doesn't exist, because we only are able to actually examine things that manifest in reality. So, you can think that there's a God out there that doesn't manifest in reality, and you have no rational justification for it. And what you believe in is indistinguishable to you and every other thinking being on this planet from the God that doesn't exist. Therefore, it's a big old fat time waster, and I will not waste time discussing it. Which means in order for us to have a discussion, you better be talking about a God that manifests in reality. And that by definition, if it manifests in reality, then this is at least theoretically detectable, in which case you should be able to produce evidence. Yes, physical evidence, real evidence. And by the way, every single one of you sitting out there who is a Christian, that's the God you believe in. If you're a Muslim, that's the God that you believe in. If you're a Hindu, well, maybe one or two of them are. Go down the list. Everybody who has posited the existence of a God and formed a religion, with a couple of minor exceptions of philosophical deism and some kind of different versions of Buddhism, but by and large, when we're talking about the world's major religions, especially the Abrahamic traditions, right down to Mormons, they're positing the existence of a God who manifests in reality, and they sing songs about it, how often he manifests in reality. And they make claims all the time about how he manifests in reality.
They claim he answers prayers.
Answers prayer, heals people, finds your car keys, whatever. If that's the God you're talking about,
won me this Grammy.
Please come and talk. Because that's the only God that matters. If you want to call in and talk about, well, my God is logically possible, I don't care. All you're saying is that it's not impossible that there's a being out there somewhere that might qualify for the criteria that I'm putting on the God thing. I care what's actually true, what's demonstrably true. So if the only conversation worth having is about a God that manifests in reality, if it manifests in reality, it's at least theoretically detectable. And by the way, all of you who believe in it, who claim to have had these experiences, are claiming to be God detectors. How hard is that to get through your skull? Ooh, I felt the Holy Spirit coming through me, and I know that God healed my aunt of cancer. Well, congratulations. You've made a testable claim.
Have an Oreo, my son.
Thank you.
I shouldn't have
You've made a testable claim,
and another
and that's
thing,
worth talking about.
There's not a single Christian who got up this morning, put on nice clothes, and went to sit in church who believes in a God that is just a possibility or an idea. Every single church-going Christian in this country, and I would say around the world, believes in a God who does real stuff.
Yep.
and who is going to do a real thing. When they really die, they think they've got a real soul inside that's going to get plucked out like a pomegranate seed and shipped off to some wonderful place called heaven, where I guess it's fruit table and pizza and yeah. And they think these are real things that are going to happen. When this lunatic Harold Camping was doing his old, it's all going to end recently, he got the people who sent him money and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then the world didn't end that day. They were really, genuinely bewildered that didn't happen. They thought an actual physical event was going to occur. The end of the world, the rapture, them going up and waving goodbye to all his sinners. We're talking real things. That's what Christians actually believe. So theoretical gods, logical gods, possible gods.
I love philosophy. I'm just chilling back with an Oreo.
I like Oreos.
Nothing gay about that.
No.
I like philosophy. I like having philosophical discussions. We've had debates about free will.
That Oreo's totally 69ing. Look.
Well, just because you stuck your nose into their bedroom, close that back up. You don't care. You shouldn't be allowed to peek into other people's bedrooms unless they ask you to. But I love philosophical discussions. I have a passion for the transcendental argument for the existence of God. That's going on YouTube.
Gotcha.
And I love discussions about identity. I think it's incredibly important how we go about determining who we are and what sort of definitions we're going to put on identity. We're going to have big issues in the future that deal with identity, that deal with, maybe not necessarily whether or not we have free will, but how we deal in a world where we most probably don't have free will or it's an illusion. We're going to have issues related to identity. We're already having all sorts of issues related to other smaller subsets of identity. For years, the intersex individuals have been either had their sex determined by a doctor or raised under one enculturated gender identity. There are people now who fit into every possible category, and some categories we couldn't even have dreamed possible. And these are all people, and we're going to have to deal with the interactions there. I love we have big problems coming down the pipe, and religion is standing in the way because it has these archaic black and white, which are mostly wrong, ideas about identity and interaction.
In-group, out-group thinking.
I'll have debates on tag, and I love the philosophical stuff. But not a one of you became a Christian because of the transcendental argument for the existence of God. I'm sure somebody will write me or call in and say, "You're wrong, sir. I was an atheist, and it's the transcendental argument for the existence of God that convinced me to be a Christian."
Now you're going to get
liar!
100 trolls.
You are a liar. You are absolutely a liar, because first of all, transcendental argument for the existence of God can't get to Christianity.
There's 50 people in the chat room right now who are composing that email just to piss you off.
I don't care. I can delete emails. My point is this. You believe in something, and you've got some reasons for it. So just call in and say what those reasons are. Why don't people often do that? I mean, granted, we had pretty honest people here today that eventually fell back to the, it's faith.
Well, yeah. but that's them being honest.
I know. Yeah. I'm happy.
That's the moment of honesty when, after all the scientific pretense that they begin their calls with.
Yeah. When your blanket of illusory reasons is pulled away, when the last little thread of that is gone, and you say, "Oh, it's faith," well, you've admitted defeat. You've admitted that you don't have a reasoned position, that you cannot defend it. And so don't you dare, after getting to faith, come back with tag or Plantinga's modologic ontological argument or any of those other philosophical obfuscations that don't prove what you think they prove, are fallacious and aren't the reason that you believe. At least be honest about what you believe, and we'll have an honest discussion in return. And if you get to faith and say that, hey, that's okay with you, I'll say it's not okay with me, and then we can go on our merry way. I think the big fear is that when other people see you in a conversation where all of your arguments fall by the wayside and you're left with faith, that's why I want to have this conversation. Because those people are now in a position where they get to recognize, do I want to be Do I want my positions to be based on reason and evidence? Am I okay with faith? Why should I be okay with faith? If faith can simultaneously justify my belief that Jesus turns into a cracker, or that Jesus walked on water, or my faith that I'll get virgins in heaven when I die, if I'm a martyr, or any number of things. You can justify anything with faith. So, what good is it? And isn't it actually bad? Don't you care about an actual pathway to truth? I know you do, because you keep calling in to give reasoned arguments. And then when they fail, you go back to faith. Just give it up.